Hey, what's going on? It's Patrick Lovell, Truth Bomb riffing at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, August 16th, 2023. And I've just been sort of in this whirlwind, and I guess in some ways more confident than I've ever been, and in other ways more prolifically frustrated than I've ever been. And I have been, for those of you who watch these Truth Bomb riffs, and thank you for doing so. Please like and subscribe and share, like always. But to those that are kind of new to what it is that I am, and the only place that I'm trying to make an impact at the moment, social media wise, is on X, because it's the only place that people argue about, the sort of the political arena in a way that you can actually try to get to people who care. Obviously, Facebook, I learned a long time ago, was a place that, this sort of interaction goes to die because the algorithms on Facebook are written to just celebrate everybody's beautiful families and their beautiful dogs and their happiness. And that's the spirit of it. They've, since basically, I guess, 2016, tried to progressively get rid of, things that are, um, I don't know, conflicts to a degree, I suppose. And then, of course, Instagram is not appropriate. Beautiful people doing extraordinarily fantastic things, and I see that more and more on TikTok. And there is a place on TikTok to share, political ideology and everything else. I mean, so far we've reached about 7.5 million views, but that have gone nowhere. And so, really, the only place to actually interact in a way that is relevant to the national dialogue about things that matter in the arena of politics and power, and who we are, and the big questions about salvaging and saving democracy and everything that comes with it, is X, even though X is a platform for hate sex bots and, manipulated by all of the, billionaire apparatuses, which I've said over and over and over, and I don't know if it's actually sinking in, is Cambridge Analytica 3.0, and wherever we are in the techno algorithm bullshit circus that people can pay for and manipulate all day with the bots, and all sorts of ramifications of who the people that are paying are creating an outcome, and it's a campaign. But what I can observe in real time are a litany of insane lies and propaganda and hate that I believe in most cases are easily qualified under libel and easily set up in lawsuits, so forth, for those who want to take them on. But because of the LLCs and the way it works and behind the screen and who does what, when, and how, you can't get to who's actually pulling the strings and designing it and programming it and for the outcome. And we know that the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and even Kevin McCarthy more recently, and Ted Cruz, and you pick your poison on the right, and quite frankly, same with the left to a degree, if you want to compartmentalize it that way, at least the traditional right and left. They are basically almost like LLCs, if you will. They're like operations behind different sorts of masking techniques that deliver messages over and over and over, and they can do it, and they can buy bandwidth and frequency and other scenarios to just kind of create a tidal wave of messaging, of misinformation, disinformation, and lies that aren't too dissimilar to what we've seen recently settled between Fox and Dominion, based on Fox, through their CEO, Rupert Murdoch, admitting through subpoenas that Fox's business model is to lie. And that's all they do all day, every day. But in the case of Fox, they settled for $787 million as it pertained to misinformation and lies about the Dominion voting machines during the 2020 election, and there's more to come. But given all of that, and given ultimately, more importantly, that I want to try to, work my way through, around, over, and, between, is the membrane of this dystopia, particularly of mainstream media, as it relates to all things Donald Trump 24/7, in context to what it is that I am revealing to you. Now, right before I hit play on this, I just happened to see a notification pop up that Michael Burry, the legendary hedge fund trader, that was the causality, I guess, of Plan B, which is Brad Pitt's company, their production with Adam McKay of the Michael Lewis book called The Big Short. Boy, it's so interesting that my mind is circling in a bunch of different Michaels at the moment. Michael Burry, of course. Yeah, sorry about that. Michael Burry just placed a I guess, $9 billion bet against the economy, which means he's probably shorting it. Okay, well, I've expected the economy to collapse for a very long time. And there's a lot of metrics that I look at and I understand because of who I am and what I've done. And if you're seeing me for the first time, I'm a muckraking journalist and a producer. I produced a 5-part series called The Con that you can now watch for free at www.thecon.tv, which reveals the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that is effectively what I call the $29 trillion truth that can basically take down the most massive criminal enterprise in the history of the world if only millions of you understand what it is that I'm delivering to you on a platinum platter in context to what's going on. So this is going to be kind of my routine for a little while because we're all dealing with it all day, every day. And last night I had to endure, and I watch mainstream media just to, again, take a temperature gauge and understand what they're saying and how they're saying it. And as a producer, it just boggles my mind because I've been asking these types of questions, particularly as they relate to MSNBC, for over a decade. And most of my questions have been guided towards Rachel Maddow above all else because she has demonstrated to me over and over and over with her sort of natural abilities, but also with her resources, that she's very capable of both asking and reflecting and refactoring the questions that I had to go do as a producer, but that she never did as what I would regard as the communications director of MSNBC, which of the Democratic Party for MSNBC. And ultimately, that's kind of a partnership with what I would call the Wall Street meritocracy to basically cherry pick and determine what stories are going to be front and center in prime time that are salacious and drive eyeballs in a way that's good for the brand, but that is not anywhere close to what it is that I'm revealing to you. And so for those of you who have been critical of Rachel Maddow for years, you know that her entire shtick, like Sean Hannity before, or Bill O'Reilly before him, although pretty much the same time period as well, but Bill O was the main kind of anchor at Fox, during the Bush administration, all the way through Obama, and then dropped off because of all of the sexual harassment type stuff and everything else. And Hannity became the guy, and then Tucker Carlson and all of that. But both, whether it's Rachel Maddow or Anderson Cooper or Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson, their job is to cherry pick certain information that's going to be delivered to their audiences to get audience share. That's the business model. And there's also behind the scenes sort of like, areas that are pretty clear to me as a producer that these, anchors and these personalities don't ever engage themselves with because it's antithetical to their business model. Going back to what I just mentioned in terms of Rupert Murdoch and, him declaring, for the world to see, especially with this checkbook, that their business model is a lie. And that's what you have to understand is that Fox has probably gained more viewers since that moment because of all things Trump, because of them being that voice in the mainstream echo chamber cable circus in the identity culture wars, even though they booted Tucker. But at the bottom line is, they still have audience share. And really at the end of the day, for corporate sponsors in 2023, all they need are eyeballs. That's how they justify ad spends, and that's how they justify the revenue model. And in the case of Fox, we know that I think in 2022, their gross revenue was $14.7 billion, of which I think 3-point-something billion of that was profit. So $787 million was just a skim, a big hit, but obviously a skim on 1 year worth of revenue, which they were willing to pay because it's so much more profitable to lie. But getting back to Rachel Maddow, who does the same thing, I'm sorry, she's a much more talented journalist and personality, and she can run circles around anybody at Fox by way of her intelligence. But at the same time, she steered clear of what it is that I've been revealing to you now for the last couple of years after we released our work, The Con, in 2020. And there's a reason why millions of you don't know it exists or what it says or what we reveal and how it's relevant to everything we're in the midst of. So a lot of times when I do these truth bombs, I have to make these references to children's parables because that's what it is. It's Humpty Dumpty is the fractured marketplace of the United States in 2023, given everything that I've just mentioned. But it's also nobody can see the forest for the trees. And it's the emperor's new clothes. And what is? Well, what I'm revealing to you. And what I'm revealing to you is literally monumentally larger than all things Trump. But ironically, Trump is an exact approximation, reflection, and mirror of everything that I'm telling you. And what am I telling you? Well, the government has demonstrated now completely in a campaign, starting with the January 6th insurrection through to where we are today, the panoply of all of his 91 charges so far fit into this box that we, the people, have been introduced to the notion that Donald Trump has defrauded the United States and everything that he's done, which is completely accurate. And quite frankly, you'd have to be a blind prosecutor not to be able to see or get a conviction against Donald Trump, which is the lowest hanging fruit criminal apparatus of anything I've ever experienced in the many, many years that I have been pursuing white collar crime that has led me down this path to become the producer of The Con at www.thecon.tv. But a couple of check marks. Last night I was, again, I mean, I'm almost like my jaw hits the ground every time I watch this, even though I can like paint by the numbers and predict what's going to happen and how they're going to, do the routine. And on X last night, I said, at probably 6 p.m. Eastern, I said for the next 4 hours, mainstream media is going to do this, this, and this. Meanwhile, they're missing what I'm telling you, right? So for example, one of my favorites to watch right now, just from a standpoint of you've got to be kidding me, is a kind of a newcomer to MSNBC who is what I learned, and I don't know the entirety of her history, but she was actually, I think, kind of like a game show host on a show on Netflix, kind of like a dating game sort of scenario. And she got put into a position to become a primetime host of a show that replaced Rachel Maddow, and her name is Alex Wagner. And I consider her a cute, very sort of inquisitive, reasonably intelligent woman who loves to ask a lot of questions. And she is incredibly giddy at the notion of all things Trump's criminal enterprise, and of course, Fonnie Willis's 13 indictments that are leading to the massive charge of racketeering, and all things that are related to Rudolph Giuliani, which is an incredible irony, as those of you who have been listening to me already know, and anybody who's ever followed Rudy Giuliani from the beginning of his career, where he was, as a DA in Manhattan, the front line to create, at that time in the 70s, really all of the elements that created the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organizations Act and prosecutions from the DA's office against the five families of the big five families of the New York five families, mafia families that ran a lot of business in New York based on what we all know the mob does, right? That's the whole purpose of racketeering. And so fast forward to 2023, and here's a newcomer. Basically, she's a rookie, if you will, to this whole game, and she doesn't know anything about history other than what she's reading from a teleprompter, which comes back to people who are like me, who write the script, who are producers, who tell her what to say. So I would be the guy behind the scenes, behind the lights, working on the stories of the day to be able to put these sorts of things in front of the American people, and I would pick and choose how we're going to tell the storyline based on what the executive producer is telling me is what our brand is, because we're looking at the numbers. We're looking at what has happened before. We're tracking on what's happening every single day, but we've got a brand, and that goes for MSNBC, that goes for CNN, that goes for Fox, and everybody's got their own shtick and how they correlate it. But in the meantime, what they all did, particularly and most importantly, Rachel Maddow, and I'll never forget when I think about this kind of analogy with Alex Wagner, that Rachel Maddow back in 2009 was a newcomer to MSNBC, and she was kind of like a deer in the headlights as it related to the the massive housing collapse and everything that constituted. And she was doing stories at the time. And I remember that she started to chase the robo signing story like so many had done at that time period. But I knew, as somebody who was unfortunately living in the 2008 great financial crisis that turned my life upside down and inside out, that led me on this 13-year mega odyssey journey to get all of these pieces of the puzzle together to be able to inform the American people what actually created that and what happened in the aftermath, which of course now I'm telling you is a reflection and a refraction of all things mirrored by Donald Trump, that the United States government and the state of Georgia and of course the state of Michigan are all revealing and demonstrating our crimes. But yet the likes in mainstream media of Alex Wagner think the world began and ended with Donald Trump. And that's all there is to it. And what I'm here to tell you is that Donald Trump is a tiny piece of the puzzle of what it is that I've revealed to you, which reveals what we, the people, have to do to come together, to rise, to create a people movement to overcome the madness of deception, lies, and most importantly, corruption, of which my calculus and my formulation states that corruption births and fuels fascism. Okay? So that's our world. And so what, Patrick, get to the point. How come you can't just tell me what I want to hear? Make my mind understand everything that you're trying to say so that suddenly I can come out of my dystopia. I can come out of my being in whatever space I am that's frustrated, that would lead me to some political camp or another. Why do I want to listen to you, Patrick? Why do I want to watch the con? Why do I want to get on board with something that you're trying to lead to create some sort of civil rights-like movement, to once and for all, create a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption? Why do you want to pay attention to me? Well, because the entire apparatus of media, again, hid what it is that I'm telling you. What did they hide? Well, first and foremost, again, they hid the con at www.thecon.tv. How did they hide it? I'll come back to that. But what does it have to do with Trump? Everything. So let's just start with the indictments that are relative, and it's relatively short, all things considered. So what we've seen over the course of the last, several weeks, even though it's been in the pipeline for a long time, is that Donald Trump defrauded the United States using racketeering through a criminal conspiracy. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. How did he do it? Well, in terms of stealing the election, using the antics of deception, deceptive acts and practices, utilizing what we now know is illegal, even though I've been telling you that for a whole long time, and nobody, if anybody didn't understand this, just based on common sense in their lives, you got to be a special sort of like lost in the weeds. But you cannot lie by doing fraudulent signatures on official documents, particularly as it relates to certifying the presidential election. So there was a conspiracy in Michigan where we've got now 16 felony counts against conspirators that did exactly that fraudulently signed signatures of fake electors to steal the Electoral College in Michigan. Now, a lot of that's actually occurred also in Fani Willis's indictments of Donald Trump in Georgia, but she also ties it to Rudolph Giuliani kind of being the brainchild of this whole thing, all of the conspirators that are involved to do the elector certification fraud, and a whole number of other elements that are involved with the racketeering scenario to steal the election, of which in Georgia they can use RICO statutes to prosecute. And that's what they're in the midst of doing, which of course mainstream media is like, wow, we thought that Donald Trump might be a criminal organization, but now we have the evidence because the state's bringing a case. And this is in addition to what Jack Smith has been doing for some time, i.e. the special counsel of the Department of Justice, in so much as that he has brought in criminal fraud exception charges against Donald Trump's attorneys. Donald Trump's attorneys who have lied in court repeatedly for their client, which of course is illegal and can get you disbarred and thrown in jail and fined in a massive way. All of these elements are either felonies or some sort of, a different degree of felony that would have significant consequences. That's why we call them crime. and we have remedies for crime, which is called the law. For those of you kind of lost in the mix, because the law has ways to be able to hold people accountable for lying, decepting, and thieving. And that's part and parcel to everything we're supposed to be. Now, meanwhile, in addition to the documentation fabrication and lawyers lying in court on behalf of their client, we've now seen, of course, potentially that the integrity of the court in Judge Eileen Cannon's court, she was put into place and appointed by the Trump administration and the Republican Party. And so there are questions based on her actions, based on the Department of Justice national security threat scenarios, which just happens to land in her court because it came out of Mar-a-Lago, and she's in West Palm Beach. And of course, handpicked, like I said, the questions are, is she compromised? Is she actually calling balls and strikes like we expect from professional judges? Well, in the case of what we're seeing unfold, no, she's not. And there's a chance that, that'll go the distance and become its own sort of, secondary sort of fight that tries to, sort that out. But ultimately, what we've seen over the course of the last, couple of months, but I've been, engaged with for the last couple of years, is that, oh yeah, we have corruption in the Supreme Court. Now, put all of those things together to remind you: documentation fabrication to steal an election. That leads to understanding that Donald Trump defrauded the United States of America using deceptive acts and tactics, which are, RICO, racketeering conspiracy, which are the likes of what the mob did. And then, oh yeah, the lawyers are capable of lying, and the judge could actually be corrupt. There's so much more that I could go into, but just keep those four elements into your head. So what Patrick Lovell is revealing to you in the con is the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that used all of those four elements. Now, in our case, what we ended up finding was north of 50 million Americans were set up by deceptive acts and practices of our financial sector that fused into our housing lending apparatus, that broke down all of the stopgaps in the credibility and the integrity of the system to create liar's loans to the tune of tens of millions, using tens of millions of basically documentation fraud. There were brokers in the pipeline that were manifesting all sorts of different incomes and assets and tax returns and everything else that they made out to fit the parameters of getting loans approved. Why? Because Wall Street was bundling and packaging these together, destroying all of the stopgaps to move mortgage-backed securities through trusts to investors all around the world as fast as possible. Because by the time we were dealing with the early 2000s, we're talking about $70 trillion in global capital looking for a place to park. And it did so in our housing market because it was considered AAA, because we sold the world that it was AAA, which is part and parcel to what the Big Short showed us, that the credit rating agencies, for example, Moody's, which is owned by none other than Warren Buffett, among others, were all AAA rubber stamping liar's loans that were all designed to blow up. The Big Short shows us a small part of that. There was a wonderful documentary back in 2011 that was called Inside Job that Matt Damon voiced, and then he became Mr. Crypto Guy, working with Sam Bankman-Fried and all sorts of other things, although I don't know if he was directly working with Sam Bankman-Fried. He certainly was with Bitcoin and blockchain. But the long and the short of it is that Wall Street was packaging these loans to the tunes of tens of millions and then dropping them around the world with all sorts of deceptive acts and practices on countries, on communities, on pensions, all through liar's loans, okay? Documentation fraud, which of course we're now seeing the government of the United States prosecute Donald Trump for doing the same thing in the January 6th insurrection and stealing the election, which leads to Donald Trump defrauding the United States. The second aspect of what we show you in all of this, and what I've done in our podcast, which you could find if you want to get the details, which is extraordinary, but at the new Untouchables through Real Progressives, and you can just do a Google search on that to check that out. So what we show you in that particular podcast particularly is that lawyers around the country were working for what are known as foreclosure mills that are hired by an apparatus called servicers to basically foreclose on homes. That's the process. They were doing it all by creating illegal or documentation fraud to create standing, which is the process of being able to foreclose on people, by lying on documents to say that they had the right to foreclose, even though they didn't. And it would have been the easiest thing to uncover in the history of the world if anybody decided to look. But of course, the judges weren't, because somehow they got the message that they were not allowing what we call discovery to show all of the details of the documentation fraud and the attorney perjury, so that the judges were literally working for the financial system that had the money to move these foreclosures through the process. That happened to the tune of tens of millions of people, using literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of illegal documents. I mean, the amount of processing that was involved here, particularly at the height of this whole thing, probably about 2009, 10, 11, was insane. The amount of numbers. We're talking, again, tens of millions of people involved with documents, and I mean, just absolute, the entire monstrosity of the system. Well, how do I know that? Well, because I'm an investigative journalist, and we did the work, and I worked with the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, AGs, all sorts of whistleblowers, to put every single piece of this thing together that the world still doesn't understand. But yet that the government is demonstrating that is illegal in all things Donald Trump. Now, I mentioned the judges obviously being involved. Well, of course, right now, one of my closest sources, and a guy who was a defense attorney in South Florida for the last 12 years who discovered this stuff, who went the distance and was the last guy to try to, last man standing, they ground him down, meaning the system itself. Now he is under, he's on like a 90-day suspension. They're going to take his bar license for telling the truth in millions of cases. And I could go on and about that. But because judges are lying in court to protect the villainous, freaking treacherous attorneys that are lying on documentation fraud to steal people's homes. Why would they do that? And by the way, the terminology is impugning the integrity of the court. Bruce Jacobs, fighting on behalf of his clients, has done that in many, many, many cases, probably hundreds, if not thousands of cases, and they are disbarring him because he's the last man standing, and they've grown tired of him telling the truth because they just want to whitewash this whole goddamn thing, where tens of millions of people got crushed. Now, the question that I just left lingering there was, why would they do that? Well, because what we show you in the con, and what I learned in my whole process, was that in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, where we had a $4.6 trillion housing market basically turn into a $600 to an $800 trillion derivative market that blew up the global economy, central banks around the United States had to step in to stabilize the financial system. And the way we did that in the United States, which is really the most important central bank of all, our Federal Reserve, because the dollar is the global reserve currency, and because we have an outsized role in global finance and that sort of thing, and all of our investment banks and our too big to fail bank apparatuses and the hedge funds and the asset managers and all of them, most of them went completely bankrupt during this time period, because they bet on derivatives of liar's loans that were created through deceptive acts and practices to blow up the world, based on everything that we show you in the con, which is beyond, light years beyond The Big Short, at www.thecon.tv, that ultimately destroyed tens of millions of people with illegal documents based on deceptive acts and practices. So our work went and put all of this together that fell on deaf ears, that we could never get to the American populace. And there's more reasons for that than I have time to go into right now. I'll just tease you with the biggest name of all. BlackRock was moved into position to manage the emergency stimulus of the Federal Reserve that was piped to them and to all of the financial system illegally, because you cannot provide lender of last resort capacity based on the statutes, because no idiot would ever write this into the statutes, based on racketeering to destroy the world. That's not something that's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. But of course it was. And that's what we did. We provided $29 trillion of emergency liquidity to the banks, and then another additional $16 trillion in what we call quantitative easing since 2013. And this is just providing trillions of dollars to the financial apparatus and ultimately billionaires that blew up the world. And so that's the country we live in. While suddenly we're all talking about saving democracy, and justice is doing showing the legitimacy and the integrity of America by holding power to account in Donald Trump, by saying everything that I'm telling you parallels and mirrors everything that Donald Trump is being prosecuted for, that all of mainstream media, whatever side they're dealing with, are, that's where the energy is, and that's what we have to be looking at, because it comes down to one guy, right? One guy that has, huge controversy in every direction, as opposed to tens of millions of people got destroyed. And one of the things that I can't stand above all else, right? You go on Twitter and you look through and you see people arguing on both sides, and most of them are arguing about Trump. And you see these people like Rob Reiner, and you see somebody like, John Cusack and others that are saying, oh my God, justice will be redeemed. Look at the law is working. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The guy who's created the greatest crime against the United States, a guy that is guilty of defrauding the United States through this panoply of racketeering, is Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is literally a tiny piece of the puzzle. That's not to say that he's not guilty. Of course he is, of this and so much more. In fact, I'll just say this out loud, which I hope many of you are thinking, is, do you think Donald Trump literally organized the insurrection? Do you think he got thousands of guys that were former, special forces and police officers all over the country to fly to D.C.? Do you think he personally did that so that they could have the insurrection and do what they did? That's led to all of this. Really? Do you think that's the guy who was the mastermind behind this? Or do you think it's possible that he was involved with billionaires that are now 3.0 Cambridge Analytica, that are all over the place, that we have seen over and over and over, are also paying for the Supreme Court justices? So look, there's so much more, but yet that's all you really need to know. What you really need to know is, if you open up the con and you watch it, then you'll understand the blueprint of what it is we are and how we got there. And then you watch everything that's going on, and you'll realize they're all pissing on your head, telling you it's rain, that this is the emperor's new clothes. And of course, we're in the midst of Humpty Dumpty, right? To make it as simple as it possibly can be. But then why do you want to follow me? I get questions all the time that are like, Patrick, okay, let's just say I get everything that you're saying. Let's just say I'm completely inspired, I'm completely illuminated and invigorated. So what do I do next? What are the solutions? I get that question every day, and I get that question over and over from people who haven't watched the con. You can't get to a place of being effective unless you know what you're dealing with. The details matter above all else. You have to have the facts. And I highly recommend you check them out at www.thecon.tv. It's free. In fact, how ironic is that? I laugh out loud every single day. Something that took us millions and millions of dollars to put together at great sacrifice and thousands of hours that I sacrificed my life for is literally worth a donut. Because all of you buy lies and you transmission lies as opposed to the truth. But I've got to connect with tens of millions of you that know that the system is corrupt, but you just don't know how it's corrupt. But you haven't connected with me yet. We have got to connect. And so this is the solution. This is the solution, okay? First of all, it's power, okay? So how is power orchestrated? Well, if you understand how power is orchestrated, and if you know that everything falls from money and you follow the money, and you get to the Federal Reserve and you find out that the Federal Reserve is corrupt for a financial system that's corrupt, while the entire justice system is coming down on Donald Trump for being corrupt and proving everything that I'm saying, but for one guy, what do you think should happen? Well, I think we should purge corruption. Well, how are we going to do that if you've got two parties that are playing ball with the corruption that has absolute control? Well, you got really two choices. The first is a bloody revolution. How many of you are willing to lean in and step into a bloody revolution? Not many. The only ones who seemingly want to do that are right-wingers that, are diehard about their guns and are willing to show up at capitals with their "Don't Tread on Me" flags. And by the way, that was my flag forever. I feel like it's been, hijacked for me because that is my point of view, by the way. Don't tread on me. and freedom and liberty and justice for all and all that sort of thing, and anti-tyranny and everything. That's who I am. I'm an American. That's exactly what I believe in, because I believe in the integrity of law, because I understand what our political structure is all about, that you got to have separation of powers. You have to have integrity. And if you don't have accountability to power, you end up with the same, disaster that has befallen all of human history. This is the same story over and over and over. Complicity, duplicity, and lies and deception for power, which is the devil. The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. Do you want to take me literally, or do you just want to understand the matrix of human behavior, psychology, deception, and complicity? People are cowards and weak in power. And the elites are typically, I like to say, they're pimps, whores, junkies, and parasites, and that's the elites. Everybody else needs to understand that when you're on the downside of the system, that you're expendable, that you're garbage in their eyes. And you know it as well as I do, that if you don't have the ability to protect yourself or fight through this or be on top of it, forget about it. What this system did is, in terms of dividing us really, is that those who didn't go through the 2008 great financial crisis and survived it came out pretty damn well, especially if they own their assets, because all of the assets got hyperinflated, as did stocks, because we created a facade in our economy because we have socialism. Because what Federal Reserve 13.3 allowed the financial system was trillions of dollars of liquidity that they got illegally, because they were all bankrupt. They were all bankrupt and insolvent because they created massive grift and racketeering, and yet they were never held accountable. They paid $250 billion to get $30 trillion. So you do the math, plus another 16 trillion, and then there was many, many more trillions since 2019, okay? They've stolen and looted the full faith and credit of the United States for tyranny. They have complete control, and they manipulated the media to destroy this country and have identity civil war, okay? And what I'm trying to do is use all of the griftopia of Donald Trump, that 99% of you who have an education and any understanding of law and order and sustainability and society for fairness and liberty and justice for all, understand that he has to be convicted. Of course he does. So finally, what do you do then? Well, if billionaires spend billions of dollars to loot trillions of dollars, who have complete control, what can you do? Honestly, what can you do? What? Like I said, you can pull out a rifle and you can go try to create a bloody revolution, and good luck against the most prolific, powerful military in the history of the world, which you should put in the back of your mind is pretty ironic that, of course, whoever on the right was able to get all of these, cops and former military guys into Washington, D.C. on somebody's dime, and then said, go attack the Capitol, which they did. They're the only ones in the world who could pull this off, because it was an inside job, and it was much more than Donald Trump, by the way. Okay, so that's one part of it. If anybody else who wants to do that type of stuff, let's say Black Lives Matter or Me Too or whomever, people anti-guns, and you go show up and you try to invade the Capitol, let's see how long you last before they come in with the tear gas with the National Guard or some sort of special ops unit and everybody's toast, right? The only ones that could do that were the inside job. So if billionaires spend billions to loot trillions and control the financial system and the courts, and then somebody on the inside would literally create a coup d'etat for a far-right group that wants to implement the new Confederacy, what are you going to do about it? What can you do about it? Anything? Is Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and AOC and everybody who's been there for like, I don't know, however many years now, going to fight for you? Have they done it? Have they purged this madness? I guess if they take down Donald Trump, a lot of you are going to go, oh yeah, problem solved. Okay, but what about the financial system that destroyed tens of millions of people using the same exact tactics that Donald Trump is guilty for? You're going to turn your back to that? Just like we did 9/11 in Saudi Arabia, so we can have the two towers drop and 3,000 Americans evaporated, and then we go to war and over, I don't know how many, I know we're up to like 6 trillion on that sort of juggernaut, and then I don't know how many millions of people lost their lives through all of these wars that didn't go after the people that attacked us. And when I say they attacked us, by the way, I'm not saying they attacked us without some sort of complicity or direction internally, because I think Saudi played a role in it. I don't know exactly who they were connected to, but I can tell you based on the evidence that exists that Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and others that were involved with it, they certainly gained from 20 years of war. Okay, and how we had the greatest intelligence service in the history of the world to be able to let 19 hijackers get on our commercial flights with box cutters to fly into the buildings when we knew they were here and who was paying for them. All of that's public information, by the way. The same type of thing happened, if you understand the kind, that we knew exactly what was happening in the housing market, where thousands of people around the country notified the FBI, they notified DOJ, they notified their superiors and CEOs, and that was the whole point. And they all got purged, and then they created this calamity that was financial terrorism that destroyed tens of millions of people using the same techniques that Donald Trump is being prosecuted for now, and justifiably. So what do you do? What do you do? Who do you fight? How do you fight? I've got all the answers. I've got the pathway to be able to literally smash this system. But what I'm missing are millions of you that understand what's going on. And as I've said before, billionaires spend billions to loot trillions. Look, if you don't have skin in the game, you're a product, okay? You're not going to be heard unless you are paying, in the era of Citizens United in our politics, where corruption is relatively legal, minus hush money payments that stupid Donald Trump was involved with up to his eyeballs, that's going down in the that he's been indicted for by Alvin Bragg in the Southern District of Manhattan. All of these things that I'm telling you can be resolved because there's a lot of wonderfully gifted, strong, brilliant people that could take this whole system down, but I am your gateway to them. They're not out talking to everybody else. It's like there's too much to lose for them. I've got nothing to lose. I've already lost everything, okay? But I cannot go away holding the $29 trillion truth that reveals all that we have to crush, because if we don't, the system will continue to crush us. And what's on the line? If you have an interest in obviously all things climate problems, what do you think it's attached to? This problem and ultimately corruption. Did I not just demonstrate this with Saudi Arabia and all of the infrastructure of our financial, fossil fuel complex? Yeah, there's more, but I've certainly discussed enough by way of what I'm trying to get across right now. And then ultimately, they're not going to relinquish power. As, by the way, indicated this last 2 weeks, we saw Mitch McConnell basically turn to a zombie on the floor of the House during a press conference, and he's still in power. And same with Dianne Feinstein, right? They're taking orders, man. They're just signing off. They're part of their establishment that gets them, that fights in Congress for the benefactors. And so what I'm telling you is, when billionaires spend billions to loot trillions, you don't have a voice. You don't have a voice. But I've got all the answers, and I've got hundreds of hours of evidence on the sidelines that are sitting in my drives. And also I've got tens of thousands of pieces of evidence of millions of pieces of documentation fraud that I can't go to any of the networks to tell, because the networks are in on hiding it, because they're all funded by the same system. And BlackRock, quite frankly, is the new Rockefellers. They're the octopus that has connection to everything, and they need to keep this suppressed because they're the ones who benefited immeasurably for it. And you did not vote for Larry Fink to be the president of the world. And he is. And that's on top of everything else. So what I am trying to tell you after all of this, and I hope you've listened all the way to the end, I hope you'll share. I'll hope you'll subscribe. I'll hope you come on board. If I'm inspiring you, call me, become part of our crusade. Donate your time if you can, because we can turn the tables on this insane situation that has betrayed and destroyed the United States. But we need your buy-in. So I'm asking you to invest $13 into a tidal wave crusade to purge corruption, a one-time $13 charge. One time. If you live in New York and San Francisco, that's a quick trip to Starbucks, right? I mean, come on. $13 though, if you multiply that by the amount of people that are destroyed by the system, who have no voice, that need to have their voice erected to the American people. If millions of you came on board, we could do a number of things. Primarily, what I'm trying to do is to create a Lollapalooza-like national barnstorming tour with all of this information in all of the cities of America, where we've got to bring out millions of people to understand the truth. It's part education. It's part breaking through this dystopia that I'm revealing to you, where we take this national crusade to Washington, D.C., and we wind up on the National Mall sometime before the election next year, where, as all of this stuff is going to be focused on the courts and what Trump is doing and what he might not get away with and whether or not he's running, they're all guilty of this. Some more so than others. Trump is up to his eyeballs in this stuff the whole time, and yeah, he needs to go down. But so too is the financial system that has absolute control. We've got to elevate this truth above everybody, and we're going to bring in all of the right people, all of the people that have suffered through this, all of the greatest the people that fought the good fight that got crushed by this. I know where they are. I know who they are. I know what they're all about. I've got all the right people, and I hate to sound like Trump, but yes, I do. And in addition to that, we got to wind up, in D.C. with hopefully millions of people underneath the gaze of Abraham Lincoln on the National Mall, to do our part, what Lincoln did then, to be able to wind up in a situation celebrated on the Lincoln Mall where he said, "A nation up by and the for the people shall not perish from this earth." Wow, man, God, who knows how long I talked for? 45 minutes. This is a joke. I'm just desperately trying to get your attention because I have the answers that the emperor's new clothes. We can destroy corruption and the fascism it fuels if millions of you join this odyssey on behalf of liberty and justice for all. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards.